to Binks Brew podcast, which is the name we've named this thing after last time where it was untitled, or Binks Brews with an S. This is a One Piece TCG focused podcast by people that played a lot of Magic before this, but are big fans of both the show, the anime, the manga, and as well as the card game. I'm your host, Alex Kessler, here with a special guest, Josh Kim Xell. Hello, welcome to the show.
Hello. Nice to be here after also being on the Magic side of things.
It's the same vibe and a different vibe. Well, I think the last time you were on the Masters of Modern podcast, we were like it was pre-COVID, so it was like live in the studio. Or have you been on since like we've been digital?
Yeah, I think I was on digital last time too.
Okay, cool. All right, it's been so long since COVID happened. But yeah, so for those who are just joining, there's a card game. It's based on the hit anime One Piece, and it's a trading card game, and it has all of the features of a trading card game. Today we're going to be talking specifically about kind of the metagame, how the metagame evolves, and ban list conversations, plus how kind of like the interesting status of how the One Piece TCG releases cards both here and in Japan, and then manages the ban list of both of those countries, or the world and Japan separately. Before we get started, Josh, is there anywhere people can find you on the internet? Throw them really quick.
Oh, yeah. You can find me on basically every platform. Xell something like Xell Tweets is my Twitter, Xell Grams my Insta, Twitch, Xell. And then I also now have a One Piece TCG focused YouTube channel at Xell TCG. So you can check me out over there.
And then I'm at Kess Wiley on, I think, literally everything. And also check out, we own a game and toy company. So we just released a Sonic the Hedgehog game called Sonic Roll. You can find it at Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, FYE, etc. And then, way worldwide more as we get closer to the March. And then we'll also be at PAX East, demoing that and showing off some of our new games. And we have some cool stuff coming out that I can't talk about yet. But there's that. And then also Spy X Family, the card game, which we came out at the end of last year. So check both of those out. Spy X Family's everywhere. You can get Amazon, Target.com, Barnes & Noble, etc. So the One Piece ban list has exactly, in the United States, 2 cards on it. We have Moby Dick, which is from set 4, and it is a 2-mana stage, which you, on your turn, if you have 1 or less life cards, your Edward Nugget, your leader card, and all your characters with a type, including Whitebeard Pirates, gain plus 2,000 power. And it has the trigger that you just get to play it. So if it's in your life total, you just get to put it in play. For those who don't remember from last video or don't know, stage cards are like kind of the enchantment / artifacts of this game. I forget, do they have like the legendary thing where you can only have 1 stage and to play under your control at a time?
Yeah, I think you can only have 1 stage.
Yeah. And so they can't be attacked. They don't attack themselves. They have global effects that get added to your board. And this is one of the 2 cards banned, very specifically functions in the Edward Nugget Whitebeard deck. And then the other banned card is Kabaji, which is a 2-cost 3,000 character with counter 1,000. So you can discard it to give a creature plus 1,000 for free. And then on the play, if you have Moji, which is the other buggy pirate, you can draw 2 cards and then trash 1 card from your hand. And then they're a buggy pirate. But specifically, this sees play in the Nami deck, which is for Magic players. It's Thassa's Oracle in a command zone, or Laboratory Maniac, I guess, technically, in the command zone. But for this, it's one of the like premier mono blue decks. It plays on a totally different axis than the rest of the game because it's a self-mill deck. And then once you mill yourself, you win the game, or remove all the cards in your deck. You win the game. And he just does that a little too efficiently for having all the other abilities that he has. That's the ban list. Now, Josh, Xell, you had thoughts on the ban list as we were going into, and I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, so I think the reason why we're talking about this is because in one of the Japanese championship streams, they alluded to the fact that after Worlds, the World Championships happen, that they're going to take another look at the ban list. And I think this has caused quite a stir. And and so I guess contextually going back to why these cards are banned, right? Like these cards in their heyday were incredibly powerful. Actually, I don't think Kabaji they pre-banned that. They didn't even allow it to be played in tournament at all. But Moby Dick was a core component to the Whitebeard decks, and that era of Whitebeard was called Boatbeard, and it was disgusting. I mean, like the card effect is just very powerful, and buffing your leader and your board for 2k during your turn for basically free is insane. Like that's a very very powerful effect. And I think for Kabaji, they were just so scared that it would turn Nami into just like a tier 0 deck, and I think nobody would ever have fun. So I
Yeah,
think they just pre-banned it.
Nami is a very good deck to be like tier 1.5, where it's like good if you are a master at it. If you like, and you have to be because it is a very hard deck to play, you can do well with the deck, but it's not going to be format defining, because as a format defining deck, in the same way that stuff like in Magic, Lantern Control, or just like grindier matchups, when those become the best thing, the format becomes miserable. People don't like not doing anything but like milling themselves and pretending that nothing is happening.
Yeah.
So I think both, and that was kind of one of the things I wanted to bring up, which was like, because the United States ban list is both separated from Japan, and Japan has their sets come out at minimum 3 months before the United States does. So they rule zero banned it in the United States, but it was like after it had already done well, I believe, in Japan for some amount of time, right? And then they didn't ban it, and so they were pre-banning it here.
I think the Nami. Okay, I might be wrong because I started playing a little after, but
Yep.
I'm pretty sure that it never was allowed, even in Japan. I don't think it was different than Boatbeard, which existed both existed in NA for a while too, before it finally did hit the ban. And then when OPO3 came out, I'm pretty sure Kabaji was just pre-banned. Like they didn't want that card to interact with Nami whatsoever.
Sure.
And it makes sense too. Like I think both these bans made sense at the time that they existed, right? And the thing is though that I do think, and this is my hot take, and this is one where I think maybe because I didn't get to experience Boatbeard, people might think I'm crazy. But I think the game has evolved a lot since those bannings. And if they were going to touch the ban list at all, I would rather see them unban these things rather than try to ban more things. That's
Right.
my somewhat of a hot take, I would say, because I think the way the meta has shaped up now is, removal is king and resources are king. And you're seeing decks that are primarily black or yellow do the best at tournaments. And I think because of that, a lot of players see it as problems, as, they are very clearly the dominant colors in the competitive scene. And so I think a lot of people are asking for cards to get banned, especially with OPO6 around the corner and black and yellow both getting insanely good cards. And so I think understandably people are upset with the meta and whatnot. But
I mean, like in the last 100 top performing decks on OnePiece.decks.com in the US for OPO5, like the era that we're in now, 15 total decks of 100 are red. And that gets worse in OPO6 coming out, where it's 7 total decks in Japan that had red in them, have seen any amount of play. And they are, I believe, exclusively purple Luffy or purple red Luffy and red yellow. Is this Sabo or Ace? I can't, because there's like a dual deck. Yeah, it's Sabo. So it's either the Sabo deck or the Luffy deck. And most of them haven't even seen play recently. It's just like yellow, black, blue, or black based decks, yellow based decks, and purple are like the three colors, and even then purple's falling by the wayside.
Yeah, so I think like looking at color balance, it doesn't look good for sure. And I think I can understand why people are like, we got to touch these colors and yada yada yada. But I one is I think there's a very clear reason why black and yellow has come ahead in the place of the One Piece metagame, and why the other colors are falling behind. And the reason from where I stand is that black has additional resources that other colors don't have. They get to use their graveyard, right? And they have recursive abilities, and so they literally can outgrind any other color because they they get to use their trash pile as a second deck. Same thing with yellow. Yellow is another color that has an access to a secondary card pool, which is their life, and they're able to manipulate that. And for Magic players who are listening who have no idea what life is, basically, if you would take damage, you instead draw a card from your life pile, and when you get down to 0 life and you take another hit, you die. But yellow has all these effects that let you manipulate that life, heal back up in life, and so instead, it's kind of like you get additional cards that you can draw over the course of the game, and that's a very powerful effect. And so I think like that there's a natural reason why I think black and yellow has come up ahead over some of these other colors. And then on top of that, Sakazuki, especially we've seen in the current meta, like removal has now gotten very efficient. And I
Mhm.
think that's one of the big differences in the current metagame than metagames in the past for One Piece. And now with the way like the new the OPO5 Lucci card, like it's like, man, if you told a Magic player that they printed a card that's Ravenous Chupacabra, but it kills 2 things ETB, like,
Right.
you could understand that that card's insane. And that's basically what that card is.
And that's like as a preview for OPO6, like the black decks are also then playing way more out of their graveyard, where they're like they have Necrotals that do that, and then they have 8 drops, which in this game is basically a 5 drop
Yeah.
because just your mana is consistent. Like reanimate 2 creatures as it comes. It's like a Sun Titan and then a littler Sun Titan attached to the same creature that are just like you're outvaluing your opponent while you're also killing everything they're doing, making black so strong. While and some of this is also just being caused, which we talked a little bit about this on the last episode, of just that every set that came out added a color. So the very first set started with purple, blue, red and green.
Yeah.
And then it was black was added, and then yellow was added. And to overcompensate for that, it feels like Bandai has put a lot of work into like pushing black and yellow much farther so that they could catch up to what those first 4 colors were doing, and getting additional pieces as this time was going. But those additional pieces haven't been anywhere near the power level of those. Like I have red green law built, and I don't think I've added a card since OP3 to the deck. And it's just because
Yeah.
and all those are good cards, but like it's getting no new tools. And it's a deck that like you should be able to like trip and fall and accidentally land on a card that would be good in the deck, because it's just like, does your creature have an ETB and is a Straw Hat? Then it should be playable in this deck. But just all of those cards have not been added to red or green. And to your point, like Moby Dick being unbanned just lets red be maybe very good again, which right now like Zoro's trying to do, but not doing well enough.
Yeah.
Which is the other
I mean,
aggro red base deck.
Yeah, I think like right now, if we're going through why I think, because you touched upon like the fact that I actually think you could probably unban both those cards and we'd be okay, is because I think now, like back in the day, like Whitebeard was able to actually protect their their board using counter cards from hand, but now it's impossible because you have cards like Hound's Blaze, and you have decks that are entirely built on just removal. And I think like Moby Dick would have a very different effect in 2024 than it did back when Moby Dick was a playable card in One Piece. And so like back then it was this thing where you could have a board and they could have three characters on board to attack with. But I think in while Sakazuki's in its heyday, there's no way. And so that's why I think like, yes, the card is insane, and there's a chance that Whitebeard becomes like a tier 1 viable competitive deck again, but I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. Like I would see it as like, oh, this is actually kind of more interesting to have other decks be on par with some of these other black based, yellow based decks. And then same thing with Kabaji too, is that like Kabaji and Moji, like they're 2 cost, 1 cost, which is literally perfect for Sakazuki to pick off at any time. And like, yes, Nami can loop those cards or whatever, but they have to invest a bunch of Dawn to do so. And in the meantime, like it's like free pickings for Sakazuki and these removal based decks. So like, I'm curious if those cards, if they were unbanned, like how they would do in today's metagame.
Yeah, well, and we moved a long way. Like in set 003 and set 4, the metagame was like Nami was one of the best decks. Like even with those cards banned, it was still doing really well. But if you look in the future, like in Japan, it shows up. But just the players in Japan are way better at Nami than the US. Like every one times the sets have come out, just like Nami show up in Japan like at a much higher percentage. For what whatever reason, because that deck is hard as heck.
Yeah.
But it's the fact that I've been told the fact that in tournaments there are people that will like the way they tap their Dawn and untap their Dawn is a way for them to keep track of the order in which they put cards on the bottom of their deck because you're not allowed to take notes.
Yeah. I mean, because that's one of the big things that's different than Magic, right? In Magic, you're able to actually note take and just have that on a sheet of paper, but in One Piece, you don't get that. So like players have come to figure out ways to help them remember things.
In general, I've recently leaned, and this is in Magic as well, just unban things and see what happens. Like the worst case scenario is it's like too good and you have to reban it. And like, yes, that like shifts the metagame, but so does printing new cards. So
yes,
I don't think it's that. As long as you're active about it and you're even like honest with like, hey, we're going to unban these. We are going to keep an eye on it because like this could need to come right back onto the ban list. But red isn't doing very well right now. And it doesn't look like it's going to be doing very well. And then this blue card like is only going to see play in the specific Nami decks, which we feel like aren't like a problem from a health perspective. We don't, even with this card, they're not going to like make up like the other decks that are powerful have a higher chance of like doing more things than she is, even if she's very good. Yeah. So it's definitely going to be an interesting thing. I mean, I guess the third color that we haven't really talked about is like not a problem, but like has also been doing very well is green. But I would say that also I think, or not green, purple.
yes,
Green and Magic because it's lands.
yeah.
But the purple color, and part of it I think is like in the same way that maybe these conversations will cause in 07 and 08 and 09 that red and green, which is actually, I think, having this happen already a little bit, that green has already been given a lot. The new Uda deck has done a lot for them too.
Yeah.
But like purple was the worst color at the beginning. And then just like they've been able to get more tools, right?
Yeah, I think OPO1, when there was only 4 colors, Kaido was actually doing pretty decently. And then very quickly in OPO2, Kaido fell off the map.
Right. And then just has like played catch up, and then now is actually doing or purple itself is doing really well on the back of a new leader card, which is the purple Luffy. And that kind of brings us to like, I think where I want the next part of the conversation for podcast to go is like what, because I do want to get to banning cards, but I think talking about what the metagame looks like now is important information before talking about what maybe would need to be banned. Because we've kind of talked about like what's not showing up, which is like often red decks, which they have a little bit of play, mostly off of the back of Zoro and a little bit of Whitebeard still. Red Green Lost still does see play, but like just every set gets less tools to make it playable while other things are getting better.
I mean, it's like the existence of Sakazuki makes red green law players, have nightmares every time they sleep.
Right.
So
It's and that gets us to like what the 3 best decks of the format are, which are really Sakazuki, yellow, and I guess it's debatable on which one of the 2 mono yellow decks, which have basically the same shell of Enel versus Katakuri, and then purple Luffy.
Those are definitely the 4 decks.
And I think of them, the kind of the big same as like blue black Sakazuki is the turn 0 or the rule 0, not rule 0. That's commander. The level 0 level deck, right? That's like the one that you should be expecting to play against. And if you're either not playing that deck, you have to argue why you think you're going to be able to beat that deck. Otherwise, you should not be playing the game.
Yeah. Sakazuki is for sure just the meta defining thing of OPO5, and I think it's interesting now that we have Uta in the picture too, which also does kind of shake things up a little bit, because I do think that deck is quite good. But the Sakazuki, you can't have a conversation about OPO5 without talking about Sakazuki. It just is the best leader we've ever seen, man. And I don't think that this leader will get power crept anytime soon. And if it does, we're it's actually bad
That's a
for the
bigger problem,
game.
right? And so
Yeah.
for those who don't know, Sakazuki is a blue black leader, so it comes with four health, 5,000 cost. It has an active main. Once per turn, you may discard one card to draw one card. So just once a turn, you get to loot. And then when you attack, you can give up to one of your opponent's creatures cost -1 for the turn. And black, the color in general, a big part of its theme is lowering, or it kills creatures using the cost, their cost number. So if they cost 5, they have a lot of cards that say 5 or less, or it costs 3 or less. But with that, they have a lot of cards, including their leaders, that have -1 to cost effects, or their cost now costs 0 or something to lower them to be able to like combo kill things. Beyond that, do you want to break down like what is the Sakazuki deck doing?
Yeah, so Sakazuki at its core is a tempo deck that relies on the effects that you talked about to reduce things and pop things. And it's the center engine of the deck is in 3 cards. Rebecca, which is a 4 cost 0k blocker body. And on play, she digs through your trash, picks up a body, and then lets you play a body from hand. And so the common card that you get with it, which is part of the center engine, is the starter deck 6 Hina, which is a 3 cost 5k on play. It reduces something by 4 costs. And then finally, the last part of the combo is Lucci, and he's a 4 cost 6k. And on play, you return 3 cards from your trash to the bottom of your deck, and you're allowed to pop a 2 cost and a 1 cost. And so the idea with the deck is you can loop these cards from your trash and are able to pick off things consistently with Lucci. And it's a very powerful engine. It gets shortcutted as RHL a lot because of how powerful the engine is. And the idea of the deck is you constantly reduce things, pop them with really efficient cards like Lucci or Hound's Blaze, which is a 2 cost event where you buff something up by 3k, either a character or your leader, and then you get to tuck a 2 cost or less. And so a lot of Sakazuki's cards basically remove something while putting something on the board or giving something more power. And because of that, Sakazuki is just like a insane tempo deck, essentially. Always just removing while developing their board or putting more pressure onto the opponent. And it's also why it's one of the most oppressive decks we've had so far, because removal has not been this efficient ever in the history of the game. And so now it pushes a lot of these other decks out of the format where they rely on like, having multiple characters on board to combo with each other. And like those decks just can't exist anymore. Like, so yeah, that's Sakazuki.
So and yeah, like it's adding this pressure to the format, and then so the 3 decks that are best able to fight it. So the first one would be purple, or I guess the
So
first one that's
purple
the one that's
Luffy.
gonna run. Yeah. Sorry, go.
Oh, no, what I was gonna say about Purple Luffy is that it does have a losing matchup into Sakazuki, but it's not that bad, and it dominates basically every other deck in the format. Like it's super good into the yellow decks, which we'll talk about in a second. But basically, Purple Luffy, it's a ramp deck. The leader effect essentially is that you get to take one of the cards from your life, from you draw from your life, and then it allows you to ramp 1 Dawn active. And so it allows you to make insane just ramping plays, right? You play things at a much higher pace than other decks can possibly do, and then they put a bunch of pressure onto you that way. But even with their speed, Sakazuki is able to just like keep up with them and remove things as they play them. But other decks like the yellow decks, like they don't have a good defense against it, and they play cards like Magellan, which is a 5 cost 6k. On play, it's like land destruction. Both players have to tuck one of their Dawns away, and it's not as big of an issue for Purple Luffy because he can always ramp back up. But for other decks, like that slows you down by a lot. And even worse is if you KO a Magellan, he minuses 2 more Dawn from your opponent, so it like sets him back an entire turn. So yeah, with those cards, Purple Luffy is just an absolute menace, and he has got a really good matchup spread across most other decks, but loses slightly to Sakazuki. But I think it's like maybe a 6-4 matchup. I really don't think it's not unwinnable by any means for Purple Luffy against Sakazuki.
Yeah, you're playing like a ramp aggro deck, which allows you to kind of like go over anything that's trying to be smaller aggressive than you, because you'll just play bigger things. You're able to lock people out with land destruct. It's kind of like Primeval Titan with the strip mine package almost.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh
And
my god.
then and like yes, the control deck who can stop your Primeval Titan or your big creature is gonna like stop you from moving forward. But if you're just quicker than them by a few steps or are able to kind of just take advantage of what you're doing, you can keep them off of it.
Yes.
And like so it's not the worst matchup, and then you are preying on all the decks that have a chance of preying on it, which helps you survive. And that brings us to the two yellow decks.
Yeah.
The one that's been around the longest, which is Katakuri, because that's an OPO4, right? Yeah, OPO4.
OPO3.
OPO3. Okay, so that was kind of the starting. What's been interesting is that before Sakazuki kind of launched in the US or worldwide, like going into this set, yellow was the thing most people were afraid of. Like all of the like articles read with the previews looking at the Japan metagame had Enel being so much more dominant, and then like the tournament in Europe right happened and Sakazuki just like destroyed everyone, and it was like, oh, that's what we're supposed to do.
Well, it's interesting, right? Actually, like, because in Japan, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the development of the meta a bit and
Yeah.
how we landed to where we did. In Japan, when OPO5 was first released, I do believe like Enel was just super dominant. Like, no one could figure out how to deal with Enel and his. For people who don't know, Enel's whole ability is that the first time he would go to zero life on your opponent's turn, he can discard a card to put another life back on. So, like, on his last life, you basically need 3 swings in order to kill Enel. And a lot of decks just cannot put that much pressure onto Enel. And so Enel just sits there being unkillable, essentially. And uh and so early on Enel was just super dominant, and then I think Japanese players realized that Enel doesn't do the super great into Purple Luffy, and then for a while Purple Luffy became king because Purple Luffy was sort of just dominating the other colors, and like I was saying before, it has a really good matchup spread. And then somebody discovered Sakazuki. Like Sakazuki before then was considered like a tier 1.5 deck. Like everyone was like, "Oh, the deck is good. Like the leader is very powerful." But the combination of Rebecca Hina Lucci hadn't really been discovered. And then once that got discovered, it was like game over. At that point, like Sakazuki took the world by storm, and that was when we started seeing like championships where like out of the top 8, 7 decks would be Sakazuki, and like
Right.
it looked really unhealthy for the meta.
It's I mean that's like the one good news is like as much as there's a conversation on like banning cards and the evolution of things and the next set coming out, like the fact that that evolved over a 3-month period is like the sign of a healthy TCG metagame, especially like
Yeah,
at this small of a card pool. Like if standard evolved that much between two standard sets in Magic, like people are like, oh, that standard format was great.
yeah, 100%, 100%, and that's why I'm jumping a little bit ahead here, but like that's why it's such a shame that we don't get to experience what JP gets to experience, which is
Right.
like an evolving format. We get the already like meta defined form of the meta, as Japan hands us their meta
Right.
and we just iterate on what they've already iterated on. And it sucks because now we always feel like our meta is more stale than Japan's, and that's just because Japan gets to do all the deck building, right? And we just pick up where they left off.
Yeah, you like enter. There's no new format for the U.S. and we'll get to that in a second because I do want to. I
Yeah.
realize we didn't really talk about the like what does Enel do and what does Charlotte Katakuri do. So what is
Yeah.
Enel's other than the fact that Enel has this like end game indestructibility clause to the player to it? What is Enel trying to do in a game?
So Enel's actually a really versatile deck. It can switch between being aggro and like late game, mid game control thing. Like it can kind of shift gears and can do whatever it wants. And a big reason for that is because it uses the Sky Island package that comes out with OPO5. And essentially, the centerpiece of that is Ohm Holly, and that those two cards are just insane. And I'm going to shortcut a little bit of what they do because they have a lot of abilities. But Ohm is a 4-cost 5K. Actually, I'm just going to say the whole thing. He's a 4-cost 5K, and if you're at 2 or less life, which Anel generally is, he gains another 1K. So he's actually like a 4-cost 6K most of the time against Anel. But what he does is he lets you look at the top 5 cards, find a holy card, and put it into your hand, and then puts it into play. So if you don't find one on the top 5 and you have one in your hand, you can also play it that way. And Holly is just a vanilla 3-cost 5K. And so basically for 4 Dawns worth of cards, you get 2 bodies that are very efficient on board. And so Anel can use that to quickly swarm the board and play the aggro game. But because of his leader ability and making him very difficult to outright kill, he can also play the late game kind of value engine too. And he has he has the yellow late game cards with Yamato, which is a 9-cost 9K. And when Yamato is played on play, he one, if you're less than 2 life, gains you a life. And then he also pops a creature or a character on board that has a cost less than the combined life total between you and your opponent. But the important thing is the life and the fact that it's a big body. And also plays the 8-cost Katakuri, which is a 8-cost AK that on play you can put an 8-cost character back into your life. Either your opponent's card into their life or your card into your life. So it can work as removal, but it can also work as like a heal effect for yourself. So it's a very versatile card. And so between these things, like Anel is just a really powerful deck in general because it can kind of switch gears to whatever it needs to be. And that's one of the reasons why Anel is such a great deck in general. And also because of that healing ability that Anel naturally has, it's such an annoying deck to play against because there's so many possibilities of like what can happen as they heal. And that's one of the things that like Anel is such a great tournament deck because your opponents have to think so much harder than you do. So that's Anel. I'm going to talk about Katakuri a little bit. Katakuri is the like the mid-range aggro deck. So Katakuri's ability is if you attach a Dawn to him and he attacks, he basically becomes a 7K attacker, and you get to look at either player's top of their life, and you get to choose to move it in the top or bottom. So you can look at people's life piles and then manipulate them to, benefit you. And what that means is that he naturally attacks a 7K a lot of the time. And then Katakuri also plays the Big Mom part like package, and those cards are just very efficient big beaters. And then late game you have probably one of the strongest late game characters that has ever been printed, which is the Big Mom. And Big Mom is a 10-cost 12K that on play gains you a life and destroys one of your opponent's life. So it's like a 2-life swing as you play it. And so Katakuri is this deck that has this like inevitability built into it because if it gets to late enough in the game, like those big moms come down and like they will just they will just beat you up. And on the way there, they have all these nasty cards that trigger out of life, which is when you take the damage and you draw that card from your life pile. If it has a trigger effect, you can choose to just play that trigger card, the trigger effect. And for Katakuri, he fills his deck with these guys who can play themselves when they're taken from life. So as you're trying to raise Katakuri because you don't want to deal with his inevitability with his late game, you swing into him and somehow his aggro plan gets even better and he just starts to snowball the game from there. And that's why he's such a menace to deal with in the game.
And so yeah, like that kind of is building out. I mean, that along with a smattering of like different red aggro decks. I guess the one new one is Uda, which I do want to talk about really quickly.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like what the metagame looks like. You have these 2 decks that are really good at pumping out creatures that are like about manipulating their life total. You have a blue-black deck that just eats all of the creatures they're trying to play. And then you have a purple deck that tries and abuse all of them.
Yeah.
Some better than others. And that is where you kind of end up. And then the most recent addition to that is the new starter Uda deck that came out, which is a 5,000 mono green leader, 5, 5 life, normal monocolor leader. Dawn, for 1 Dawn, when attacking once per turn, you may reveal 1 card from the top of your deck and add up to 1 film type card to your hand, then place the rest of the bottom of your deck. So it gives you somewhat card selection as long as you're playing mostly film characters, a lot of card selection or card draw engine when you're attacking, and then plays the film package.
Yeah. And basically Uda is I'm actually going to make a YouTube video on the deck because I recently won a tournament with it, but the Uda deck basically is super good at swarming. It's like the entire deck is all about just swarming, going super wide. It's kind of like a white weenies a little bit from Magic. You just go super wide and you're able to you're just able to just overwhelm your opponent with the sheer number of bodies you're able to put out. And imagine if White Weenies had a draw engine, because that is literally what Uda is. Like Uda just gets to continually draw you cards as you're swarming the board and just overwhelming your opponent. And so the deck is the film package in general has always been good into Katakuri in particular, and I think the deck also does quite well into, like, I don't think it's winning, but it's at least, I think, only slightly losing, if at worst, against Purple Luffy and Sakazuki. So it's pretty positioned. It's like positioned pretty well in the current meta, I think.
Like good at abusing the yellow decks, and then like the other 2 decks, it's not like too much on the back foot. Which I mean,
Exactly. And like we've seen this actually in the recent Japanese tournament, where in a future set that hasn't come out in the West yet, a Uda won the whole thing, beating several Sakazukis, and so the deck can beat Sakazuki.
Oh, this is the sealed. Okay, that was a sealed tournament. All right. Sorry. I'm looking at this list that's on and I'm like, why? How? There's no way that like this list is just every Straw Hat and then Trafalgar Law, 4 of each with like weird 3s ofs and 2 ofs in random places, but it's not, because that is the actual just straight up starter deck that they printed. And, and that's what it was, a starter deck event, and so that's what won. Okay. Sick. But okay, so yeah, so I think that's like, because and for those who don't know, as far as release schedules go, the starter decks kind of get released within the time frame of when the main sets get released, and those add new leader cards and new cards, and often will be micro metagame shakeups that happen in between. So like purple red Luffy was added in between set 5 and set 4, and the like a lot of the yellow cards and black cards were originally added as starter decks that then a follow-up set was added to quickly after that. And so that's just kind of the consistent pattern for how these are being released. And so so I mean looking into the future and the conversation, so we talked about unbanning cards. So if do cards need to be banned? Does Sakazuki? Because if you look at the future as far as like metagames go, which I know you're complaining that Japan gets it ahead of time, which is the next conversation, Sakazuki is still doing very well. It's not as dominant because there's like now the Perona deck. There's 2 new decks that take advantage of black between Perona and
Moria,
but it is still very much a part of the top of the metagame. And then yellow still hanging out there. Purple Luffy seems to have dropped entirely by the wayside. It looks like Purple Luffy does worse probably against the Moria decks, which makes sense based on what I was discussing earlier on how Moria is just, it's doing what Purple Luffy I think is doing now, but instead of using ramp cards to accomplish it, it's just reanimating things from the graveyards to like counteract the Sakazuki removal package. But do cards need to be banned out of yellow or black?
I don't think so. And like I think that in general, the Western community is far too happy to see bans, and people complain all the time. I started the game playing yellow. I had no idea Katakuri was going to be the monster that he is. I just thought the character from the show was cool, and so I built Katakuri, and I would not like. The deck wasn't even like tier 1 by any means. Like, it was a good deck, don't get me wrong, but like the amount of people who wanted 10 cost Big Mom to be banned or to be restricted or whatever was insane to me. I was like, I get that people want shakeups just because, and I think people have a special hatred for yellow's mechanic in general, and I understand. Don't get me wrong. I've been there. I've also had a last trigger out of someone's life be a beige, and it loses the game for you. I've been there totally, but the thing is like it is just not that strong. Like it really like it's just like a memorable thing that happens when someone gets lucky and gets like an insane trigger off of their life, and so people like internalize those feel bads. But when you play yellow and you realize that you're at the mercy of your life pile all the time, it's like people should play yellow and get understand that like for yellow players their whole deck is designed to get things off of their life, and otherwise you're playing these like pretty mediocre cards. Now yellow does get better in OPO6 and it does get some new tools, and yeah, the deck is going to get even better, but I still don't think we're at a point where we should see bans. I think there will always just be a best deck, and if anything, after OPO5, which I've actually enjoyed the meta for OPO5 a lot, by the way, even though the meta is pretty narrow with just like 4 to 5 decks that are represented. I thought the meta itself was actually very fun, and it wasn't one of those things where like the top meta deck that was meta defining was um like an unfun deck to play against. Like I actually think Sakazuki is a deck that requires pilot skill. It's intricate and still loses to a lot of decks. And it's one of those things where like I would rather that be a top performing deck than I don't know some. I'm thinking like Lantern Control, right? In modern or something.
Nami, for instance.
Yeah, Nami. If Nami was a top tier like tier 0 deck, like that would be awful for everybody. Maybe I'm being selective there, but I just think Nami isn't the best deck to be the best deck in the format. But
no, I think like as a person who has the deck and like loves playing that style deck, I think you can recognize that like if a meta game was made out of this is a bad game.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
It's that's that like the fact that deck is viable and is a thing you can do, good game. But if it was the only thing people were doing, bad game.
Yes, yeah. And so moving forward into OPO6, we see more leaders are able to be at the forefront. Like you look at the decks that are winning in OPO6, like it's pretty varied. Like in terms of leader diversity, I understand people have their favorite leaders that they want their leaders to be good, their favorite colors, and they want their leaders to be good. But if you're just take a step back and just look at like what decks are considered viable in OPO6, there's a lot. And I actually think that the OPO6 meta diversity, even though it is centered around the black decks, the black X decks, and the yellow X decks, like to me, it's exciting to see that there are so many different leaders that you could do really well with at a big tournament. I think that's super exciting. And like to ban cards right before we're about to get to a much wider meta than we're currently in just seems like a huge mistake to me, because I think like you ban something and we go back to like another narrow meta, like that would just feel so bad in my opinion. So
and that's what like that was the decision they made right before OPO5, right? Like they banned multiple red cards because red was doing so well that they like the funniest one being they banned a Nami card that they literally like the week before launch and sold out a like pre-con set, or not like a special limited edition like promo set that like the main reason to buy it was the Nami card that they banned a week later. And I was like I bought it. I was like bought 4 and I was like, wait, what?
And not only that, the starter deck that just came out also had the Nami, so you couldn't even play the most recent starter deck. Like it's so bad. Yeah, when that ban list happened, I was also very upset. One, the timing of it was just weird. There was like 4 weeks before the next set comes out and like changes the meta entirely.
It felt like a like tournament specific ban. It felt like we know we have a big high profile event this week and we want it to be good or like mixed up, but then in 2 weeks a new set comes out and we can unban all these cards. But for this one event,
and it was really funny because in my play group, like I play with one of the best Whitebeard players in the country, and it was very funny to see that one like month where he was forced to play a different deck, and the Whitebeard effect is you draw from your life every turn, and he would do that on all the other leaders he was playing because it was such a habit for him as a Whitebeard player. Super funny. But no, that was a ban that was legitimately bad for the game, and I still think that like this banning things right now would be just premature, and I think it'd be really short-sighted. But
Sure,
do you want to? Should we talk about like if we were to ban cards, what we would ban?
sure.
Is that?
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I this is all your opinions because I wouldn't even. I mean, it sounds like one of the like three cards in the Sakazuki Black Hina Lucci combo set, but that also sounds. I mean, what Lucci is doing sounds oppressive, but it sounds also like just kneecapping the deck in a way that would allow these other decks that were previously maybe considered problems to be too good. So I'm interested to hear what you think should go.
Yeah, so my opinion is like if I were to ban cards from the Sakazuki deck, I would ban like the cost reduction cards that are too efficient because I think like the reason why Sakazuki the deck is just so good is because that you have cards like the 3 cost Black Hina that on play reduces something by 4, which is a big number, and puts a lot of cards into range. Like if that card didn't exist, I think the deck would be much less powerful. You'd hurt a lot of the black decks pretty good without like completely shafting the entire combo of the deck. Like you could still replace Black Hina with Helmeppo, which sees more play in the next set, which is also another body that reduces costs, but not quite as efficiently as Hina does. I would also maybe look at the card Great Eruption, which is a 1 cost event that reduces the cost of things by 2 and draws you a card. And black, one of the weaknesses to the Sakazuki deck and these black decks is that the cards that are actually in your hand are at a premium. And so, taking away a card that cycles itself for free would, I think, help, that make their weakness of their hand being a problem just a tiny bit worse. And you can still replace that with other cards. It just wouldn't be as efficient. Yellow's a really weird one to me. Yellow, if I was if I was to ban a card from yellow, it's so weird because the two yellow decks that exist, Katakuri and Enel, are so different from each other, if I'm being honest. And like they work on very different axes. So if you were trying to deal with both of them simultaneously,
I'm trying to
I
see like
guess I
if
would
there's any cards that they're both playing. It's like four
Beige and
cost
Amaru.
Sanji Amaru.
Yeah. I think it would be one of those cards. I think Beige is an insane card. And the fact that you have such a powerful effect attached to a 2K counter, and 2K counters are just, they're premium in the game.
Yeah,
And every deck wants to, it's like every deck wants to run at least 8 2Ks. And the fact that one of the sets of 2Ks that you play in yellow decks is Beige is just like insane.
yeah.
And so I would say like maybe Beige would be something I would touch where like now some of the feel bads that people get from playing against yellow is a little bit mitigated. And yellow's forced to play a different 2K. So I think that would be what I would touch versus like
It also has
I
like
don't
the
think it
most.
yeah.
It has the most like emotional swingy feel bads. It feels like right. It's the cards that
Yes.
people remember wrecking them so thoroughly in a way that felt oppressive because it's like in
Yeah.
a zone you can't affect. That like by affecting it, you're giving it to them, and
Yeah.
and they have such an easy way to manipulate it or lock it in, so it's a like not a guaranteed hit, but a consistent hit they're expecting to have. That like
Mhm.
getting rid of that allows the deck to maybe function on just like the not the plateau, but the same level that the other decks are expecting to fight in, right? It's like
Yeah.
in Magic, like there's a reason, to be honest, that I think like the new Besiju is maybe a mistake, right? Is just like it's you can't interact with it. There's no spell that gets it out of people's hands. There's no spell that counters it on the stack. You're just like, if I have an enchantment or an artifact that I rely on or a
Yes.
land, I can't stop it from dying. And there's no
Yeah, yeah.
counterplay. And is
No,
that
that's
a
a yeah. That's exactly it, right? Like it's just like you can't interact with this thing and so it just feels bad cuz it just happens to you and you just have to deal with it. And I think for yellow in general and like moving forward in the game, like I think defensive triggers like that are the ones that I think are the ones that people are going to be most mad about, I think
right?
overall. So and that's why the other card that I was thinking about was million volts 2 million volts Amaru is another
Hmm.
card that people remember because it heals you after you take the damage. Um and basically allows you another chance at another trigger. So I think that card is another card that maybe you could take a look at. But honestly, yeah, again, I'm just saying this as like if you were to point a gun at my head and say you must ban cards from Black and Yellow, I think those would be my choices.
Right. I'm trying to look. I'm trying to see if I can find a black there's a red yellow deck. The Sabo decks use a lot of play. Okay, so it's not playing beige, but it's just playing a whole new package. That's like a
That
full,
deck works on a completely different
completely
axis, if
different
I
access.
remember it.
Yeah. It's that's closer to the revolutionary package for the current red. Yeah, it's here's and then the Yamato deck is also not playing it. Okay, Beji. So okay, in that sense, like there are other yellow decks that are seeing play that like are finding success without the card. But
Yep.
I agree fully that like this set comes out in 4 weeks. Just just like wait
Just let
4
people
weeks and let
enjoy.
it come out and
Yeah.
see what happens. Now and because the Japanese meta game is there's so many different things going on. If anything, I think the argument for banning a black card makes more sense, though like it's less centered around one leader card. The shell is a lot more present in that metagame, but even
Yeah,
then
this
the like from a manufacturer of product perspective, it's also like the when you need to ban cards unless people are like leaving your game, it's when the past cards are preventing people from buying your new cards.
yeah.
And that's not what the case is with this metagame. It's a bunch of the new leaders are seeing play. Those are offering different decks. Yes, they're playing the shells that Sakazuki was playing and other characters are playing, but they're like Moria and Perona are both seeing a ton of play using similar shells, and they're just doing fine. And even Perona
Yeah.
doesn't play the the
The
Hina package.
Rebecca Hina
Yeah,
Lucha, yeah, it doesn't play that.
because I don't think it's not playing on the same. It's not attacking the like minus to characters pack. Like that's not like what it's trying to do. I don't think
It does, but it has its own sort of thing going on
vibe.
with a different new card. So it does the same thing, but compared to Sakazuki and Moria, it can't use Lucci as freely because Lucci requires you to put so many cards back from your yard back into your deck, and
Mhm.
Perona doesn't discard that many cards. So
Right. You're not getting stuff into the yard, so it's a different. Cool. So now we've gone to I think the last part of the conversation going through all of these things is we wouldn't ban anything. We would unban things. I think I agree. Like both of those sound right. The metagame seems to be shifting pretty drastically going to the next set. Red needs help, but unbanning a boat would helps with red decks out. Just one boat. It's not even that
just one
big. It's
vote.
pretty
It's
big,
just
but
one
it's
vote.
like it smiles. It's got a big smiley face on the front of it. Come on.
It looks so happy.
The last thing is the release schedule, which is I think is also one of the things causing this problem, is that like the
Yes.
US enters their format. I understand the wanting to ban things if I were entering into a Magic format and it was solved 3 months ago
Yeah.
and I'm now having to play this for 3 months as the format that got solved is showing all these new cool decks that I can't play with for another 3 months. I would also to some extent be like, well, the only way we have to mix up this metagame actively along how we're playing it is for ban conversations, right? Is like
Yeah.
that's really the only lever the US has on its metagame.
I'm gonna put my game designer hat on a little bit. I'm not a game designer by any means, but like just trying to understand like what the player base is saying and why they're saying it. Like I get that as people get into One Piece and they, from the Western side, and they're it's hard to find the cards. But let's say they're like, okay, I'm so gung ho, I'm gonna pay whatever to play these decks, and you get to see the Ghost of Christmas Future, through Japan, and you're already upset with the current meta. You're like, man, I just got into this game. I've got this sweet iceberg leader deck that I'm so excited about. And at locals, I'm just getting dumpstered by Sakazuki. And you're telling me I got to deal with 3 more months of this stuff in the future? Like,
Right.
I can kind of understand, right? Like where they're coming from and why they would want bands to shake things up. Because then maybe their beloved iceberg deck can somehow rise from the ashes. But I think like Well, I think one thing that people sometimes forget is like when one deck gets banned, the next most powerful deck, like there's a power vacuum, right? Like
Right, right,
something else
right.
will take its place. And then that's why also though, I think so many problems would be solved if we just unified the releases, man.
Right.
I swear like it would not feel nearly as bad because like we would be all afforded that kind of chance to experiment and figure things out for ourselves too. And like, right now it's like playing an MMO where the guides already all exist, which is like, I guess where we're at right now in today's MMO thing. But like, it's so much more fun to have that feeling of discovery and understand how things can evolve over time. But like, because we just get this like hand me down from the Eastern meta, like it just feels like we always get to play with someone else's used toys, right? And I think that's like a sensation that kind of just sucks.
It's if every single day right before the One Piece manga came out, someone just told me what happened.
Yeah. It's like it sucks. It sucks.
And like it's not even like, I guess the banning option is like the manga versus the anime, at least, where it's like, oh, but when you watch it animated, there's a ton of new content, and plus like the difference between Blackbeard versus Law visually is so different than when whatever, what have you. I mean, small spoiler, but it like it's just like, it's like, or I guess it's like reading the leaks that people just went to jail for.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's crazy. By the way,
but yeah, I like that. That definitely. I think the answer is obviously like the good news. I mean, the great news is that at the event they did a month ago, like 2 weeks ago, a month ago by the time this podcast is being released, they announced that the Digimon TCG that they do, which is they have like 3 big ones. It's Dragon Ball Z, Digimon, and One Piece. They have a bunch of other ones, but those are like their 3 current most successful ones, at least in the US, is going to be universally released. The next, moving forward, Digimon is having simultaneous releases in Japan and the US, which for one means that they have the production technology to do that. And to me, what that feels like is, hey, we have our big properties. We're just restarting Dragon Ball. Like, we're making a brand new TCG that's like taking the first one and evolving it. So let's not do that for that one, because we're like in the middle of relaunching this and we don't even know what that looks like. One Piece is massive and we don't want to mess it up. But we have Digimon, who's doing good. Not doing amazing, but it's fine. But we can test like our distribution models. We can test the technology on how we make the cards. We can test with our new printers. We can test with our editors. We can test with our translators. Like, can we do simultaneous releases? And if we mess up the Digimon TCG for the US, fine. We didn't like, that's not the thing that was packing the stadium. It's doing well. People love it, but it already has some hiccups on its play style. So like, worst case scenario, that TCG in the US takes a big stumbling block. It's not even a percentage point on our or not a big percentage point on our income statement. So, and then they figure it out. Then they figure out the distribution model. Then they figure out how to do the translations. Then they get the graphic design team in the United States to be on their level, and they make sure there aren't leaks and blah, 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 blah. And then they can roll that out for One Piece or any future, right?
I want that so bad. Yeah.
Because I think they recognize as well that it is one of the big things that happened at that Bandai event in LA here was that a lot of the like upper brass at Bandai was in the room. They came to the event to see like, oh, One Piece is selling out the Los Angeles Convention Center, right? Like, we have lines around the block. We have 4-hour lines to buy packs. 5 packs. People waited 3 hours to buy packs. So it's like, maybe we should invest more in having this simultaneously. And that, I think, does help, like, from a metagame perspective, from a game design perspective. You're no longer existing in a purely spoiler environment. You're getting to like I already bought the cards. And that's one thing we didn't also talk about is the like, and I don't want to get too into this because I do want to have like a whole episode about the finance world of the One Piece TCG and get someone that I think neither of us would consider ourselves experts on it. But the fact that you can look at what Japan's sets are doing to preemptively play the finance, like which cards are going to be expensive next set because they get a new leader, or a deck makes them a lot better, or a new card makes that leader so much better that you can buy it here ahead of time, but then not play it.
Yeah.
I bought like a $30 card for the $20 card for the new Perona deck that's coming out that doesn't see any play currently in any deck now, but will be a staple in that deck. And that deck is one of the best decks of the format, so it's $20 already.
Yeah.
And there's like
God.
no like, oh, I figured this tech out. I like that doesn't. There's not even being smarter than the finance game. It's just like, I am playing already the most expensive version of this game because everything is like such limited supply. And then on top of that, the metagame is already solved. So I'm just buying in to like, just this card is going to be expensive and it's going to be expensive forever. There's no me being smarter than that.
Man, going back a little bit and talking about like the big wigs at Bandai too, like I'm curious too from the Japanese perspective, because they're trying to do this World Championships, right, which is happening pretty soon. And for the Japanese player, that kind of sucks for them because they announced at the stage, and by the way, it was very funny when they announced this because it seemed like no one actually knew, and so they just went with it. But the Japanese players are going to have to now play like 2.5 sets behind them in order to compete at the World Championships.
Sure.
And so it's going to be, it's just like a really bizarre thing that has to happen because obviously we cannot play 2 sets ahead because we don't have those cards. So they're forced to now, like the top players of Japan now have to relearn what OPO5 is like, even though they're, again, 2.5 sets ahead of us.
And that metagame is totally different because that's the other thing. Different. Is like we're like the metagame is evolves still, right? The Sakazuki taking over the tournament, people figured out the starter deck Hina package, like that happened basically after like they were already in the middle of set 6 spoiler season, if not the set coming out. So they've never played this format. This format has never existed for them. And then in 3 or whatever amount of time, they have to like relearn a format. I don't even know if that's like, I think that's going to be a disaster.
And like, I think one of the things you were kind of bringing up is like, they have to now deal with the fact that we've advanced the meta a little bit. Right. And like, going into just tournament stuff, like recently there's a top player named Chris Sock who kind of developed his own purple leafy list that's like designed to be really good against Sakazuki. And like, there's just like small metagame changes that are happening even within our current things that now they have to somehow contend with, and like it sucks.
Well, even like habitual stuff, right? Like the Whitebeard problem you were describing, where they would like draw the extra card every turn from their life deck because they're so used to it. Like if I had to go to like, if I was like grinding for tournaments in Modern and Magic or an event and I like knew how to play this deck, and then I had to like go to like 2 sets ago where like the most recent, most important card in my deck didn't exist, and like have to like make decisions in game after training to know that that card was available to not expect it. I don't know if I could do that. Like, I don't think human brains are good at that of like,
like deleting excess information. Like, no, like imagine if you took a Modern player and told them you have now 1 month to prepare for a Modern Horizons Modern. You have to play that metagame.
It's not even, it's like, that's such a it's like, it's almost saying like you have to play like in a month, you have to play a format. I mean, now we're really near this. And this is, if you don't play the Magic game, this is a lot of that lore now. We're swinging to that side. But the most recent set just came out with cards that totally modified one of the best decks in Modern, which is the Rhino Cascade deck, by adding Draco and Leyline. And then you play that deck for the next 3 months and you get really good at it. You're the best in the world. You win every tournament to the point that you are going to the world's tournament event. And they tell you, oh, wait, actually, you're playing, we're playing the Xell set. So Rhinos doesn't have Draco or Leyline in it. Just from the base level that you're going to play lands and tap them for mana thinking that they're Rainbow lands.
Yeah. Wait, I mulliganed. Where's my Layla? Oh. Yeah.
But I mean, it's like, to the sacrifice of those players, this could be the thing that pushes releases to be as universal as possible.
Right.
I'm fascinated, and I'm assuming this information is out there, and I'm sorry to listeners that I don't know it. And actually, if you know it, please comment it in the description. But I'm fascinated to know how the Digimon TCG is going to catch up. Do they have a window where Japan maybe slows down a set release, that they just release both US sets in the same time? Do they just release both US sets, just two sets come out in a month, together? How do you, and I don't know what the set cadence for the Digimon TCG is. It could be the Magic one used to be, where it's they take summers off. So there could be just a window in the middle of August that they could go back and re-release it. But it's definitely, I'm interested to see if they wanted to catch up what that looks like, especially with how hard it is to get product now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I have no idea. I mean, One Piece, God, the crazy thing when I think about this game is it's such a there's such a huge demand for this game because the game is so good. It's on this popular IP. The cards look fantastic, but to get to where the game needs to go, Bandai has actually so many things to fix to get to
Right.
the core issues here. And man, I'm curious if Bandai will actually be able to stick the landing here, because there are so many things that have to happen. And Bandai doesn't exactly have the best track record when it comes to this stuff either. And so I really hope they have such a golden egg here. The golden goose has laid the golden egg, and I'm just curious how they get it to how it can get the care it needs for it to grow up into the great game that I think it could be.
The One Piece TCG is currently competing with Disney as the actual good new TCG. It's competing really with Yu-Gi-Oh as third place, along with Lorcana in the United States, of what the top 3 TCG in the United States is, with Pokemon and Magic just kind of dominating at the top.
There was a article I saw that said that on TCG Player, the number 1 selling sealed product was One Piece, over everything. I mean, that's crazy to me. That's insane.
And on the other hand, you did have the event in LA where it was a disaster in a lot of ways, and in some ways stuff that's fixable, in some ways stuff that we don't know if it's fixable, right? Bandai has a relationship with the tournament organizer for that event that is, I believe, one of their largest distributors in the United States. And if that's true, that's a hard tournament organizer to no longer use.
Yeah.
But they are also apparently terrible. Or at least that event went very badly for them. Quotes from friends: worst tournament they've ever played.
Yes.
from a functionality, not from a gameplay perspective, but just from the functionality of the software. You have some of them are easier decisions, right? Bandai doesn't know what to sell at these things, right? The fact that I, a fan, went to this event where they made open to the public to be, and had a lot of cool stuff. It was one of the weirder, more surreal card tournaments I've ever been to, because they did everything that I wanted Magic to do for the last 20 years, right? They had original Oda hand-drawn manga panels of the entire Gear 5 saga. They had panels. They had concerts with the lead singer of the 5 most iconic One Piece intro songs. They had the voice actors for Usopp there from Japan. They had a bunch of announcements being made. They had a bunch of cool installations you could go take photos in. They had announcements for their next TCGs. Next door, they had a Dragon Ball Z esports tournament room plus card game launch. All of it really cool, except they had none of the things that make it worthwhile going to a card tournament. You couldn't play the game. They had no side events. The 2 side events they had that fired had 4-hour lines. The only place you can buy anything that I could spend any dollars had a 3-hour line that was capped, and maybe would once an hour let 2 people into it. And all you could buy when you got to the end of it were sealed product, and you were capped at 5. And cool figures that sold out, but that all of the figure sign of what you could buy was so high up that they couldn't reach the signs to put the sold out signs on them. So you didn't know that the things that you wanted to buy were sold out until you got to the front of the 4-hour line. So you couldn't buy singles. There was no way to buy singles in the store. Like, it was back to the old PTQ store level grinding where you had that guy with like the suitcase and 17 trade binders on a table actually like trying to do deals and like taking Venmo payments on the under the table while they were like pretending you to trade you cards. And then a tournament that was like half functioning. It was like so surreal.
Yeah.
And that was for me not playing in the tournament. For people that are playing in it, it had three, every round had three restructures. There was a whole buy structure. They also didn't charge anyone for the event, which like sounds like a good thing, but is actually means that they like didn't have enough money to pay for the infrastructure to make it work. And then they also like, if I'm correct, like they gave originally you would win tournaments to earn your place in this event. But then halfway through the year, they decided that it was a free entry to the event, but all the people that won tournaments got buys. But then they didn't implement the buys.
Yes. 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 Yeah. You heard exactly that. And they had months to prepare for the buys. And yet on the day of the tournament, they double entered all the people with buys in the tournament. And so it was like they delayed the tournament by like 3 hours that day.
And they don't have a system that like if your name is the same name as someone else, aren't you just like,
you're just
SOL?
Yeah. So our mutual friend Krim, his real name is David Wynn, and that's a very common name. And multiple David Wynns got round one losses because none of them went to the right tables because there was no way of differentiating which David Wynn you were. So yeah. It's just like how. And so after 2 rounds, Krim had played 0 actual games, but somehow his standing in the tournament was 1-1. Like, what is happening? And they gave him a win because they felt bad because they couldn't figure out the system, and so they had to name they had to go in the system and name the David Wins with a number attached to their name. So I think Krim was David Win 3 or something. So.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Like it's Bandai's learning lessons that Wizards of the Coast learned in the 90s before the internet existed. Right? Like that's where DPI numbers came from, was like, hey, people's names aren't actually good unit like like ways to differentiate people. So
yeah.
But like that being said, I think like to the point that Bandai brass was there, this was a very public event. The mistakes that were made were very public. Now, do I think next time I go to one of these things, there's going to be a person selling singles? No. Do I think they'll have side events? Yeah, probably. Well, do I think that their tournament software will function? Hopefully.
I think the thing that they use, Best Coast pairings, like I think no one likes that software, so it's very crazy to me that the TOs decided like that's what they wanted to do the entire event on. And actually, because you mentioned that the event costs $0, a lot of people entered the tournament just to get the participation prizes and then dropped.
Yeah.
So it was actually a mercy that so many people dropped. Because can you imagine if like the 500 people or so who dropped were in that tournament too? Like, oh my god!
Like the one thing I did feel bad is I had like friends who traveled to Los Angeles from like Milwaukee, like middle, like not Los Angeles. Like they got on airplanes to come to this event. It was kind of like, oh, I don't get to do anything.
Yeah. It's
So
terrible.
It definitely is something that like I do have hope. Like this is the perfect storm of a way to fix these problems, right? It was at a very high profile event with everyone that mattered was there. The problems were pretty blatant. The worst case scenario is that they like saw this like, oh, it's really popular. Look how packed it is. There's lines everywhere. If there's 3 hour lines, that's a good thing. We want 3 hour lines. And that's like the thing you worry about. And of course, like there's like the people who, in this situation, you also have everyone covering their own butts too, where it's like, no, I wasn't the problem. This is why this went wrong. Our software is fine. It's just because you guys made the decision to switch up the tournament structure halfway through the year. It didn't know how to handle that. So let's not do, like there's ways to kind of pass the blame, and hopefully that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But back to the metagame. Do you have anything specific you want to talk about metagame? We're at an hour 15.
Metagame wise, like I think I've said what I have to say. I think this game is like so good. Like for people who are coming from Magic, like, and you want to play a competitive 1v1 card game, like I've played so many competitive card games, and like One Piece is truly like so good right now, and it just sucks that there are all these problems barring people from playing the game. And it's such a shame because I do think this game is like truly special and has a lot going for it. So hopefully Bandai figures it out.
Yeah, and like the one good news about it is I do think there's space for this type of game to just succeed. It's so weird. I'm fascinated to see how, and this is true of Magic as well, right? Like, what does pro play do for a game? And I think like in some ways the lesson is it doesn't do a lot, right? Like there's a lot of effort put into Magic the Gathering to make pro play work that ended up when they couldn't do it, Magic grew faster than it ever had before. And there's arguments why that happened that have nothing to do with maybe that. But on the other hand, I do think I know a lot of people are like, tournament play is the reason I want to do this game. Why? And especially with One Piece, where there isn't a commander format or a board game version of it that you can kind of sidestep into, like this type of experience, I think is important. And I do think that if they can figure it out, there's a hole for it, right? Like Magic is not doing a great pro scene job at the moment. They're doing decent and they're getting better. Like every like the last year has shown that they're trying to kind of restart that ship and they're doing it relatively successfully, but it's not what it was. And the focus of the company making it is definitely no longer centrally focused on that experience. They're focused on the 4 other versions of playing Magic.
Yeah. Just to tag on a little bit is like, I don't think that the esports side is going to sell things. And I think we've seen that across all esports in general. Like, I think one of the big learning lessons from all the stuff that have happened in the last few years with esports is that like esports for games is important to just like exist, but it doesn't have to be the central pillar in which your game is founded on. And in fact, like most games benefit from not doing that, like you were saying.
Yeah. The dream of esports is useful to motivate people to play games and be the very best and create tournament experiences that are fun. And that is a thing people really enjoy and will buy into. But those things do not need to be like selling out Staples Center. They're like, you're not trying to be football. You don't have to. Yep. And there's a middle ground that can be found that the One Piece TCG might be able to find. It could also figure out the esports side. Like it's not like it won't try and do that. It's just, does the card game need to succeed? Does it need that to be figured out to succeed? I don't think it does. I think it's fun enough. I think the character, like I'm playing it and collecting it and loving this game from the perspective of someone who just loves One Piece, right? Like I like, it's cool that I care that much more about the characters that I'm playing with and that there's like the IP behind it that's really cool. And the game doesn't suck, right? Like those two things together make it very fun. I'm never trying to win a pro One Piece experience. Even if like going to major events, especially if this podcast continues or I do other stuff in this space, like I'm going to hang out with people and to do cool like entertainment stuff, not which is what I do in Magic now. So, but yeah, so for those who don't know, really quick, that don't want to like hear spoilers or anything, if we jump into that, where can they find you? Specifically, where is your channel that you're doing more One Piece TCG content?
Oh, it's at Xell TCG. YouTube, I don't remember how YouTube does URLs again, but
I think there will be a link in the description as long as you send it to me and I send it to the editor.
Xell TCG, but yeah.
And then and make sure to check out Sonic Roll just came out. It's a Sonic the Hedgehog based strategy game. It's like a big box game co-op. There's like a whole campaign mode. You can play one player. There's like unlockable secret content that I can't spoil, but the rulebook is taped shut and you don't get to open it unless you collect all 7 Chaos Emeralds. So definitely make sure to check that out. And then obviously Spy X Family, the card game, which is a $20 game, much more of like a party game. If you like something like Coup or Love Letter or any kind of bluffing game like that, it's available. It's $15 to $20 depending on the retailer, and you can get it like Barnes & Noble, Amazon, etc. So check out both of those things, and then stay tuned for cool other game announcements that'll be coming out probably closer to PAX East, because that's our next big event, or Gamma. So like March, which this podcast episode comes out in a week or two. So this will be like 2 weeks before that. And if you like this podcast and or the content of this podcast, you'll probably like some of the announcements we're making.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.